evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryanto Diman. I'm Olivia Quay, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. It's day 2 of Singapore's circuit breaker. Ahead on the show, we discuss the new COVID-19 temporary measures bill, which bars social gatherings of any size.
Meanwhile, full home-based learning for students at all schools and institutes of higher learning starts today. Counting just those in primary and secondary schools as well as junior colleges, that is already more than 400,000 students learning their lessons from home. And this will last until May 4th, when the circuit breaker is scheduled to end.
Joining us now to discuss this is our tech editor, Irene Tham. We have been trying to figure out how parents and their children have coped with home-based learning. So Irene, you have a daughter in primary 5. She did 1 day of home-based learning last week when the Education Ministry implemented the once-a-week HBL. And of course, she properly starts the full home-based learning today. What are some of the pain points that you have experienced or she has experienced with the student learning space, which is the HBL system?
Hi. I haven't had the time to log into a student learning space yet today, and I'm not sure if the legacy system problem has been addressed. But based on what we have experienced last week, the biggest problem for me is the lack of support for devices like tablets. SLS work can only be done on the computer. And so because of that, my daughter was not able to record her Chinese reading task directly on SLS using our Apple iPad last week. A separate app must be downloaded for the recording and then the audio file uploaded on SLS separately. Similarly, she couldn't complete her math online work because the developer has somehow forgotten to add support for a virtual keyboard. So you need to physically have a keyboard, a mouse, and a laptop to be able to do the work. And I don't intend to buy her a laptop just yet to do SLS homework. I think it's too wasteful. After this 1 month, what's next? I mean, it will be an expensive paperweight, right? I mean, I prefer to use existing devices such as a tablet. I think most parents feel the same way too. But over this weekend, I've seen how parents succumb to the pressure. They bought they've been snapping up some of the cheaper laptops at consumer electronics stores.
Irene, we've seen posts on social media of some parents not coping well at all, having to juggle their work as well as facilitating HBL for their kids. And you've spoken to some parents. What are their reaction to the first day of HBL?
Well, I think the short answer is they're struggling to juggle work and to juggle the need to log in and to manage their kids. I mean, first we need to set up the device for online access and play tech support for any issues that may crop up, such as intermittent access, password issues. And then the password issues also apply to access to multiple portals, because some schools may provide homework not just on SLS, but they use private operators portals like Coolbits for math or BrainPop for science. So my daughter's work today include a few paper worksheets, access to SLS, and 2 other supplementary portals. And then you have to deal with distracted kids. They have the tendency to switch to YouTube and other apps and tabs. And parents have to monitor this too on top of the work demands. So I think, and then when students face difficulties in their work, they will ask their parents for help. It's easy reach, right? And we're not sure if the teachers are readily available. You can email them, but then the corrections and the guidance may not come immediately or promptly. So I would much prefer lessons to be conducted at a slower pace, and I think some parents prefer it to be done at a slower pace too, so that the children have can focus on corrections, and also parents can focus on their work.
Yeah.
Well, you're calling for slower pace lessons. We've been hearing that some parents are even calling for a 4-week break instead of the home-based learning. Is this feasible though? Because what would it mean for the entire school year?
Well, actually, I'm totally in favor of that, because I mean, rather than struggle with work and schoolwork and with so many things coming all at once at home, and then we're at each other's throats all the time. I think I mean, with HBL, it inevitably puts the burden of schooling the kids on the shoulders of parents. Many of us have full-time jobs, so and not every employee is sympathetic towards lower work productivity. So what can be done is perhaps we just call the 4 weeks, give it a total break, give the kids a break, cut parents some slack. And then the kids, when they go back to school in May or June, they can catch up with their work. These are unprecedented times, right? So I think we need to have unprecedented measures, even if it means slower catching up later on.
Right. Irene, it's interesting that you touched a bit on, creating a space for students to be able to, learn. Now, this HBL experience has to be educational, of course, for students, as it can be beyond getting them to do their studies on the student learning space. Now, what can parents do, you reckon, to replicate the school environment as much as possible? Because we understand that some parents are organizing virtual canteen breaks so their children can still interact with their classmates.
Well, there are two aspects. You have the academic aspect and the social aspect. Parents have been advised by schools to set up a daily routine for the kids involving, fixed waking up times, breakfast, schoolwork time, and then break times. I think it's very hard to do that. I mean, it's hard enough for working adults to create, all these zones for themselves at home. What more setting it up for the children? I mean, parents' inbox and WhatsApp have been beeping nonstop with work messages, demanding for immediate attention. I think we have to accept the fact that work from home, and thus by natural extension HBL, will be less organized and everything will revolve around the work demands of parents. The social aspect is more fun and it doesn't involve any parents' guidance because I think kids organize it themselves. The example you brought up on virtual canteens, virtual recess time, this was set up by a bunch of ACS boys, without the parents' help. And just because they want to, they miss each other and they want to have the time, they want to see one another, just like back in, when school was going on. So. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Irene. We wish you and your daughter all the very best in navigating HBL for the next 4 weeks. That was our tech editor, Irene Tham. She's written a wish list for home-based learning, and the link is in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube.
On to the local COVID-19 updates. From 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night, all travellers returning to Singapore have to serve their 14-day stay-home notice at dedicated facilities instead of their own homes. They are transported straight from the airport to the hotels.
Meanwhile, 21 vacant HDB blocks in Bukit Merah are being refurbished to house healthy foreign workers working in essential services. The workers will start to move into the 3-room flats progressively as works are completed in the coming weeks.
Also in the headlines, a new $30 million grant has been launched to help local farms ramp up their production of eggs, vegetables and fish over the next 6 to 24 months. This is to help produce enough food here and is part of Singapore's strategies towards achieving long-term food security. Why eggs, veggies and fish? They are the most commonly consumed products in Singapore.
Singapore reported 106 new cases yesterday. 103 are locally transmitted. This brings the total number of cases here to 1,481. 39 of the new cases are linked to clusters at foreign workers' dormitories.
So it's the second day of Singapore's circuit breaker. But already in day one yesterday, more than 7,000 written advisories were issued to members of the public who breached the stricter safe distancing measures. Most of them were caught at hawker centres and markets.
In a Facebook post last night, Environment and Water Resources Minister Mazagos Zulkifli said that starting today, authorities won't hesitate to issue written stern warnings, which will lead to a fine to those who still continue to gather in public. Now, to enforce these new stricter safe distancing measures, a new COVID-19 temporary measures bill was passed in Parliament yesterday.
The bill also allows a minister to prohibit events and gatherings or impose conditions on how they are conducted and on the participation in such activities. This enables us to better regulate events and gatherings, including those that take place on private properties. For example, we had earlier required certain events and mass gatherings to be deferred or cancelled. We will now also disallow social gatherings of any size in both private and public places. This would include having private parties or gatherings with families or friends not living together at home or in public places such as parks and HDB void decks. For our enhanced safe distancing measures to work, we need members of the public to take the measures seriously. Therefore, failure to adhere to the measures without a reasonable justification will constitute an offence. The penalties are aligned with those under the Infectious Diseases Act. For first-time offenders, the penalty is a fine of up to $10,000 or an imprisonment of up to 6 months, or both. For second or subsequent offences, the penalty is a fine of up to $20,000 or an imprisonment of up to 12 months, or both.
If you're caught flouting the law, penalties are aligned with those under the Infectious Diseases Act. First-time offenders can be fined up to $10,000 or jailed up to 6 months, or both. For subsequent offences, the penalty is a fine of up to $20,000, up to 12 months jail, or both.
The new law will also allow the government to requisition land, property or services needed to ramp up healthcare capacity and public health capabilities, which Mr. Gan said may be necessary if the number of COVID-19 cases continues to rise.
To discuss more, we have Assistant Political Editor Lim Yan Liang. Now, Yan Liang, how can authorities enforce the law? Say if a private social gathering is held in someone's home, for instance, wouldn't it be an invasion of privacy?
Hi. So, yes, home is a private sanctuary, but the COVID-19 temporary measures bill passed yesterday gives enforcement officers wide-ranging powers to prevent private social gatherings from taking place, given that COVID-19 threatens public safety and can overwhelm Singapore's medical system if tough measures are not put in place to slow the virus's spread. This is why there is a need for the circuit breaker in the first place, because significantly reducing the interaction of people, both in public and in private, can help to curb transmission. So in this instance, the law supersedes your ability to do as you please, even if this is in your own home.
Right, right. And
Well, before we move on, Yan Liang, it's important to differentiate what sort of social gatherings break the law in the first place. So could you give us some examples?
Sure. The bottom line that Health Minister Gan Kim Yong laid out in Parliament yesterday is that social gatherings of any size, be it in private or in public, are now disallowed. This includes any private parties or gatherings as long as they involve family or friends that do not stay with you in the same household. So birthday parties, housewarmings, class reunion gatherings, barbecues, mahjong sessions at your condo, all these are very clearly not allowed during this 1-month circuit breaker period. So if you say, PM Lee said I can go down and exercise in the park, maybe that means I can hold a small informal gathering at East Coast Park. Then I'm sorry to say Mr. Gan was also very clear yesterday that gatherings at parks and HDB void decks are also clearly prohibited at this time. Basically, you need to ask yourself if the social contact is confined to those living under the same roof as you. If it includes anyone outside this tight circle, then it is disallowed. This includes your child's private maths tutor, your cleaner that comes once a week, and so on.
yeah, and I just want to jump in there. It's interesting you noted that there may seem to be a little loophole right there, you know, for some to use the excuse of, oh, I'm going to the parks, to the stadiums, under the pretext of exercising. Are the authorities doing anything on this front?
Well, if exercise is being used as a pretext, it will easily fall apart and under any kind of scrutiny by enforcement officers who have been deployed on the ground in large numbers to ensure that the measures are being observed. Among the powers granted by the new law are powers of investigation and powers to demand a person's name and address for the purpose of deciding whether circuit breaker measures are being complied with. This means an enforcement officer can demand that you show him or her your IC or other proof of identification, and he can also demand that you produce any other document you have in your possession. The officer can also enter any premise, by which means including a private home, without a warrant and using force if necessary to search and inspect a place and seize evidence as required. So in the scenario you've outlined, this means that an officer can compel you and your friend to show your ICs and easily determine whether the two of you indeed stay together. And if not, you would be breaking the law. And if you fail to cooperate with the officer's questions or purposely give a wrong answer, then that is considered an offense.
Well, Yan Liang, if people continue to flock to the parks and other public areas, do you think there'll be more measures implemented to further clamp down on the overcrowding of these places?
Well, first, it's actually quite clear that parks and stadiums are not supposed to be safe havens where the new law doesn't apply, but simply a place where you can go to do some quick exercise, either alone or with your immediate family that you live with. Mr. Gan has also said that a strong signal will be sent to those who are egregious in flouting the measures, as they are putting not only themselves but others at risk. So, although enforcement officers will, of course, look at the facts of the case carefully, including whether there were reasonable explanations for non-compliance. However, if there is a flagrant flouting of the rules, a few bad eggs can actually spoil it for everybody. The minister can actually amend the control order to include parks and stadiums by simply publishing the new order in the government gazette and presenting it to Parliament.
Well, thank you so much, Yan Liang, for your invaluable insights right there. I think we've learned a lot from this interview with Yan Liang, and things are certainly made clear right now. Now, we were speaking to Assistant Political Editor Lim Yan Liang on the new law that bans social gatherings at home or in public spaces. Before you decide whether to head to the park or mall, do check out these links to see how crowded your destination is. The links are also in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube. And as you can see from the video, the crowd size is color-coded with green signifying low visitorship and orange indicating high visitorship. But regardless of the colors, do still practice safe distancing and avoid crowds when you're out. Globally, France has become the fourth country to pass 10,000 deaths from COVID-19 after Italy, Spain and the US. It now has more than 78,100 confirmed cases. France has been in lockdown since March 17th, which is due to end on April 15th. Yesterday, authorities further tightened measures in Paris, banning outdoor sports activities between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Twitter's co-founder and CEO Jack Dorsey has pledged $1 billion of his personal fortune to COVID-19 relief efforts. He joins Amazon's Jeff Bezos, who pledged $100 million for food relief, as well as Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. He offered more than $25 million to help research through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. China reported 62 cases yesterday, double from the day before and the highest since March 25th. New imported cases accounted for 59 cases. Now, this comes as the epicenter of Wuhan began allowing people to leave the city today for the first time since it was locked down 76 days ago. Wuhan saw just 2 new confirmed infections in the past 15 days. In total, it has had more than 50,000 cases and more than 2,000 deaths. China correspondent Elizabeth Law is in Wuhan, and this is what it's like inside the Tianhe International Airport.
So I'm in the Hubei Tianhe International Airport. Today is the first day that they have reopened after a 76-day lockdown. The first flight took off this morning at 7:25 a.m. It was a China Eastern flight that flew from Wuhan directly to Sanya in Hainan Island. There are no international flights that are coming in here yet, and there are no flights to Beijing, but airport authorities that spoke to us earlier said that, well, they are looking at reintroducing this flight. So now here I am in the airport, and most of the shops are reopened. As you can see, they've all got this QR code over there. So you're supposed to scan the QR code and take your temperature to show that you are well before you're allowed into the shop. And there is quite a lot of music going on because they are sending off a reinforcing medical team from Jilin. And so there is quite a lot of singing and quite patriotic music that's happening. So earlier, but of course, even though the shops are open, most of them are being sort of having step-down operations. About 5 minutes ago, I tried to buy a coffee at McDonald's, and they said that no, they will not be able to serve coffee because they are just serving a step-down menu as they gradually resume full services. So here it is.
The intrepid Elizabeth joins us live from the streets of Wuhan. Hi, Liz. Now, Liz, the city's lockdown has been lifted by the Chinese government, but it seems that things aren't going back to the way they were yet. What's like on the ground of Wuhan right now?
Right. Hi, Jan. Hi, Olivia. So right here, I'm standing in the heart of Hanjie. Hanjie is one of the most popular shopping streets in Wuhan. As you can see, the crowds are still quite sparse, but you've got quite a lot of international brands here. You've got things like Under Armour, you've got Nike, you've got Adidas, Starbucks, and on the other side, I'm not going to turn over, there's H&M and Uniqlo and all of that. So the people are starting to come back, but obviously it's still a very sparse crowd. People are still doing social distancing. Everyone is in a mask because it is the law that you have to wear a mask. And also, everything is just a little bit more muted. Like, for instance, to come into this shopping street from the main road, I had to scan a QR code to show that I was well, where I'd come from. I had to show them a scan of my passport just so that they would be able to track who was here. And then I had to have my temperature taken, and I sanitized my hands before I was allowed in.
Well, Liz, thanks to your vlogging, we caught a glimpse of what Tianhe Airport looks like now. So how different is it compared to your last trip to the city early in January, I believe?
Right. So today we spoke to some senior airport officials who said that today they have 200 flights, 96 taking off from Wuhan, and 104 that are landing here in the airport. Now, how this is different from usual is that they generally have about 600 flights. To 200 to 600, that is a lot of difference, which shows you how they are still really trying to get back to normal. And again, when we say normal, this isn't exactly normal per se, because there are still a lot of social distancing measures. Things are different. You have to scan QR codes. You have to have a temperature taken before going into stores. And I think that is not the normal society that we remember.
Now, Liz, thousands are expected to leave Wuhan now that the outbound travel ban has been lifted. Reports are suggesting that more than 55,000 people will leave the city by train. With people crowded in tight spaces once more, is there a risk of another wave of infection? Are there any other potential problems that might emerge from this?
Well, you see, it sounds like a lot, but don't forget, these trains are huge. And it doesn't mean that because there are 55,000 people that are leaving on trains, it means that they are going to be crowded together. There are social distancing measures in effect. The seating is going to be staggered, and each train can only take a maximum capacity, as with planes as well. There is a maximum capacity of passengers that they can take. Of course, every train is disinfected. You have to show that you have a green code, which means that you are healthy and you don't have the disease, and of course have your temperature taken before you're even allowed to board a plane. And from what I saw in the airport today, you basically go through at least 3 checks: one before you enter the airport, one before check-in, and one before you board the plane. So really, they are trying to make sure that no one is who is unwell is getting on the plane, which may infect people in a very crowded space.
Well, thank you as always, Elizabeth. Stay safe. That was China correspondent Elizabeth Law reporting from the streets of Wuhan, where the lockdown has been lifted after 76 days.
Now, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, do log on to straitstimes.com. Also, do let us know what you're up to at home during this circuit breaker via Instagram stories with the hashtag StayHomeWithST. Once again, I'm Haryanto Dimanu with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.